Hello, this is Caroline Larson, and I'm going to be focusing on fostering cross-linguistic connections in math today. I will be focusing on grade 2 math, and the topic is adding and subtracting. I am looking at the Common Core standards. The domain focus would be numbers and operations in base 10, and focusing on the place value, understanding properties of operations to add and subtract, and basically fluency. And so the idea here is that there's also a language objective. And so that is what I'm going to be primarily focusing on, not necessarily the math itself, but that language objective for all of our students to be able to explain how to solve addition and subtraction problems with two-digit numbers. So I will be working with an iReady problem for our math, and the routine is also called a try it and discuss it. And it oftentimes focuses on one word problem for math. And then we go through those concepts, and the first one would be the 3 reads. So the first thing that I would want to do is go ahead and go through this in English with the students. The question, the word problem: at the fair, 39 students wait in line for a ride. Then some more students join in line. Now there are 93 students in line. How many more students join the line? And so the idea being, first, we ask, what is the problem about? And the idea with what is the problem about, we have that in Spanish and English. And it's just to get students talking. So thinking about, we're looking at a fair, we're wanting to go on a ride. There's different things to get their attention, and it really is just to start to begin to build those connections with language and maybe references they know: feria, fair, different things like that. And then the next question would be, what are we trying to find out? So then that second part, trying to pull out those numbers. And this would be an opportunity for students to just share what they think they're trying to find out. And whether that is explaining that in English and Spanish is, in this time, it is just a discussion. And then oftentimes that last question, what information is important, is really good to do after you've introduced language in Spanish and English. And so we're not going to quite do that third read because we don't want them to just jump to numbers and guess which numbers we're doing and what are we trying to find out. We really want them to dig into the academic language. And so that is where we're going to pause here and then go into different ideas to be able to build that math knowledge. So as we would be talking about that last question, it would be important to have anchor charts up on the in your boards or in your classroom, and thinking about, there's two different things that we really want to focus in on. We first have that math academic language. And so it is important to have a math academic language anchor chart because it is different oftentimes than a language anchor chart. And sometimes those language anchor charts can also be, a story they're reading, or it might be connected to something else. So I just have a couple examples here of what may be a math academic anchor chart and what are those cognates in that math academic language anchor chart, and then what could be a language anchor chart, and you could constantly or consistently be adding words to that based on what is happening in reading, what is happening in science, and being able to once again put cognates there as well. But they are going to be different. And I think what we also notice oftentimes in math is those cognates are very similar oftentimes. So I think it's important to students to be able to see more in mas, difference, differencia, line, linea, different things like that, to be able to start comparing that language, as a lot of times it is really one letter difference. And so being able to build those in both languages, and then anything that we're looking at in the language itself is something we can build and continue to compare as well. So that's the first thing we would do, is reference our anchor charts before we continue on with the question. The second thing that's important is to be able to build some language around those words that may have multiple meanings. And specifically, if there is a word that we use in math academic language, we use it in everyday language, being able to break that down, because oftentimes we also use different words for resources we have. So the one I have here is line, and to be able to ask students, which one is a fila? Which one do we think is a fila? Is it the one on the right or is it on the left? And so being able to connect that Spanish language, that line in English could mean that it is a line of people waiting for something. And then it also can be just a straight line. Línea is what we want to see as if we're looking and making a number line, or if we're just looking at anything in geometry and talking about líneas and different shapes. And so I think it's really important to take time to look at those words that have multiple meanings in English and be able to separate those out. And then also just call out anything that may have different ways of saying it academically. So in the book, we are going to have rectas numéricas, and then we're also going to have teachers that are just going to call them líneas numéricas. So again, number lines, what are we using, and what word do we want to use when we connect that word number line and what Spanish word? So again, really taking time to think about some of those shortcut words that we also use, not only in our language arts or our ELAR world, but also in the math world. So then the next part is coming back to that original word problem after we've broken down some of the language that students may need to know. And this was our original problem. And we want to get back to what is important. What is the important part of this math problem? And so this is where, after we've done that language activity, we've looked at our cognates, it may be helpful for those students to be able to read that problem in Spanish. And whether that is you want them to silently read that problem in Spanish, or we do it as a class, we do it as choral reading, but being able to have those two word problems connected, so they may be able to, again, see those cognates, students, estudiantes, and maybe some words that they didn't see before, such as atracción, that is a ride in English, and just being able to kind of compare notes on what the problem is asking. And then again, we're wanting them to go ahead and move toward that solving the problem. And so that's why you want to, at this point, consider, connecting that Spanish language to the English. And so the next part is allowing those students to think about that problem. And we first want to have them independent practice try it. Try to solve it on their own. It is really important at this point for them to be given some independent time and to build their thinking with either models or visual representations, because if they're not able to explain it with their words, they're able to explain it through their models or their visual representations. So again, going back to that language objective, we may not be able to fully explain it in English, but I can see their model and then they can explain it to me in Spanish. And so again, reaching that language objective while also being able to build on that academic knowledge and those things that they need to understand in math, So it is a balance between the two, but it's really important to give those students at this time some independent think time. So we're not necessarily depending on our friends at this point or our classmates to show us what to do, but we're really being able to sit down with what we've understood the problem is asking us and work through it. So at this point, the activity, it's really important to allow students, we've given them that independent think time, and their step one is to start discussing how did they begin to solve the problem in any language, or they can language. And even if their partner is not strong in both languages, it's important for them to just share it out, as oftentimes we know that when students are sharing orally, they're able to build some thinking and some strategies around explaining more in depth of what they may have done, especially in math. So that discourse is really, really important regardless of the language. So this is what we would want to do next, is just to start with how did we begin working through that problem. We're not focused on answers. We're just focused on building that discussion piece around what they started to do with this problem. And this is the part that can often take a while for the students to work on. And this is where we now want to think about those parts. How did we put those parts together to get an answer? So again, can you use discourse cards? Can you use them in English and Spanish and mix it up? Yes, definitely being able to have slides or discourse cards that you can show as you're asking them what are the expectations for this time. And so now that that first discussion has been with them and their preference, we want them to find a new shoulder partner. And we want them to now pull in sentence stem support and really think about language and how we want to put together syntax, and thinking about, I want them to first now talk about, we were thinking about that problem first, and they should have that in one language, or translanguaging that first part, and then build a sentence stem. Now I want you to practice your sentence stem in English, and then if you need to transfer back and forth into Spanish and English, go ahead and do that. But let's practice that oracy of saying aloud that sentence stem so they can hear themselves practicing the transitional language. So sentence stem support is first, I first began to solve the problem by. Next, I put together or I took apart. And finally, I, really having them build that language back and forth also provides just that structure. So when you're working with the students, they have a starting point to be able to discuss the math. And then the last part of that, and working with a partner, is really helpful for the students when they're done with that discourse and discussing and getting to that answer. It's often helpful that they're able to build one of those sentence stems and they put that answer in their workbook. Why? Because then that connects that oracy to a written aspect, and then they always have it for reference. So if we go to our next lesson tomorrow, they're able to switch back and look and see, what was my written response yesterday? How did I solve that math? What did I put together? Were we adding? Were we subtracting? But just giving them that support as a partner group to put that answer together in a written form really builds that literacy and oracy together. So I want to reference Ballinger et al. In the Cross-Linguistic Pedagogy article, Harnessing Transfer in the Classroom. And I just want to discuss and reference that we want students to be able to use their cross-linguistic influence, and we want them to be able to have that interchangeable as they use those most conventional cover terms. And then also just to allow them to evaluate, and as teachers, we can evaluate and reflect on our learning practices and what makes most sense for our students at the time. And so also just thinking about our learners as they continue to employ their acquisition and have those advanced stages of transfer, it's really important that they are able to use both of those languages and be able to celebrate their bilingualism as they go further in their education. And so as we go back into this specific objective, just as a review, was explain how to solve addition and subtraction problems with two-digit numbers. So the important thing is we want to be able to see, can our students do that in either language? It doesn't necessarily have to be English. We want to see if they can do that in that time of their discourse. However, we do want to start building, again, some practice in English. Oftentimes they get tested in math in English. And so we want to be able to slowly build that content knowledge, building that bridge with both languages. And then again, once again, building that academic language. It is really important for them to be able to use models and visuals and give some additional think time. Oftentimes as teachers, we get really busy and we want to show them how to do the process in math. Whereas if they're doing it and taking their time in that process, we giving them times to share out, they're going to build those stronger math connections and actually have a deeper understanding of math. So we have to be very careful, and it's a balanced area of, do they have the academic language in math, and do they have the skills in that content in math to be able to go on to the next topic or skill set required in math. And then finally, the aspects of content and language connections is we always want to use every single class as an opportunity to build English oracy and literacy. And so math is a fantastic place to do it, as you oftentimes have a lot of word problems. And so can we incorporate those various bilingual pieces into their math practice? Can we show different visuals that have Spanish on them so they can read them and connect them into their learning? And celebrate that bilingualism and build that engagement as they go through their math content. And then again, building just specific aspects of the English language. Sequencing words are oftentimes a very big part of math, as most math takes different sequences. So just being able to take that time for students to build syntax and then bridge that transitional words and oracy, being able to have that practice, that practical practice in English. And then finally, just being able to have them practice some writing skills, and not at a lot of writing, but just being able to do some short sentence practices, building that sentence stem. And so they're able to reflect on what they wrote and be able to start building their oral language to their written language, and then just being able to have that explanation, as that was one of our objectives. So as I wrap up, these are my references for my activity today. Math is my passion, and I do feel it's so important to be able to build those connections with language in math. And so I enjoyed sharing my ideas, and thank you for your time today.